Number 1. Julianne McElwain. On the night of March 2, 2022, McElwain stabbed her 38-year-old partner, James Joseph Crossley, multiple times in his bedroom at her former home in Dunmurry. Crossley, who had been asleep after consuming alcohol and sleeping tablets, suffered fatal stab wounds to the body and abdomen. Despite efforts to save him, he died soon after, leaving a family devastated and a community in shock. At the time, Crossley was on bail for a prior domestic assault against McElwain, and a restraining order prohibited him from contacting her. The court heard that the pair had been in a toxic, mutually abusive relationship. McElwain had previously lived in a women's refuge to escape Crossley's controlling behavior. Yet on that evening, she contacted him to resume their relationship. During the trial at Belfast Crown Court, McElwain claimed she acted in a temporary loss of control due to the prolonged abuse she suffered, attempting to frame the murder as manslaughter rather than murder. The jury, however, rejected this defense, finding her guilty of murder in October 2024. Judge Mr. Justice Kinney described the murder as brutal and savage, while acknowledging the severe stress and fear McElwain endured over the years. Nonetheless, he emphasized that no justification exists for taking another person's life. She was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 12 years before parole eligibility, the lowest allowed under Northern Ireland's sentencing guidelines for murder. The sentence reflects both the seriousness of the crime and the mitigating circumstances of her experience with domestic abuse. Detective Inspector Michelle Griffin of the PSNI described the case as tragic, noting the devastating impact on the victim's family and the children left behind. She reminded the public that no one should take the law into their own hands, urging victims of domestic abuse to seek support and protection through legal channels rather than resorting to violence. Number 2. Dion Christie. At number 2 in this countdown of the most evil UK women sentenced for murder in 2025, we have Dion Christie, a 24-year-old mother of 2 from Falkirk, Scotland, whose violent relationship ended with a young man stabbed inside their own home. The victim was 21-year-old Jevon Haig, Christie's boyfriend and the father of her unborn child. In June of 2022, while Christie was around 12 weeks pregnant, the couple became embroiled in a heated and violent argument inside her flat on Wright Street. What began as a struggle ended with a 12-inch hunting knife piercing Jevon's body and killing him almost instantly. When police arrived, they found Jevon dying from catastrophic injuries, the scene already soaked in blood. Christie claimed that Jevon had stabbed himself during the struggle. She told jurors that he had been violent and alleged that he was trying to cut their baby from her womb when the knife entered his chest by accident. Prosecutors rejected this version entirely. They argued that Christie stabbed Jevon in anger after tensions over money and lifestyle boiled over. The court heard about a text message Christie sent the day before his death saying, "You know what's dead, you," which prosecutors described as chilling evidence of her state of mind. Forensic evidence proved damning. Christie's DNA and fingerprints were found on the knife that slayed Jevon. Medical experts testified that the wound was consistent with a deliberate thrust rather than an accident. Although a computer simulation suggesting Christie's account was highly improbable was ruled inadmissible on technical grounds, the jury still found her explanation impossible to accept. Her delay in calling emergency services only worsened the picture. Instead of immediately seeking help, Christie waited several minutes before calling 999. During that call, she initially blamed Jevon, telling the operator that he had stabbed himself. Prosecutors described her actions as showing a wicked disregard for Jevon's life. By the time help arrived, there was nothing that could be done. Jevon Haig was pronounced dead, his life ending violently at just 21 years old. The trial at the High Court in Stirling also revealed troubling patterns from Christie's past. Jurors heard evidence of previous violent behavior toward Jevon, including incidents where she had stabbed him in the leg and slashed his clothing. Allegations from a prior relationship painted a similar picture. After carefully weighing the evidence, the jury convicted Dion Christie of culpable homicide, concluding she acted under provocation but was still criminally responsible for Jevon's death. In May of 2025, Christie was sentenced to 8.5 years in prison. Detective Inspector Scott Roxburgh later said he hoped the verdict would bring some measure of closure to Jevon's devastated family and friends. At number 3 in this countdown, we have Nina Mercer, a 43-year-old woman whose betrayal unfolded behind the closed door of a modest flat in Strode, Kent, and ended with a man left bleeding to death in his own hallway. 61-year-old Alan Tompkins had allowed Mercer to live with him at his flat in Newark Court, Gun Lane. Friends and police later revealed that he financially supported her, funding her lifestyle and giving her a place to stay. On the afternoon of the 23rd of July 2024, after Alan received a food delivery, Mercer turned on the man who had helped her. She stabbed him repeatedly, inflicting 6 knife wounds. One blade was left protruding from his back. Alan was left alone, fatally injured, with no attempt made to save his life. Instead of calling for help, Mercer fled the scene. She later returned with an associate, Lee Robinson. While Alan lay dead inside the flat, Robinson stole his wallet and bank card. Mercer then took Alan's car and drove to Cuxton Leisure Park, where she disposed of her blood-stained clothing in an apparent attempt to destroy evidence. It was a calculated effort to distance herself from the violence she had unleashed. 2 days later, concern was raised when Alan failed to attend work and missed a planned meeting. An acquaintance contacted the police, fearing something was wrong. Officers went to the flat and found Alan's body lying in the hallway, the knife still embedded in his back. As officers secured the scene, Mercer walked up to the property and was immediately arrested. The investigation quickly closed in on her. CCTV footage captured Mercer's suspicious movements around the area before and after the slaying. Forensic testing later confirmed that her DNA was present on the murder weapon. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Mercer pleaded not guilty and forced the case to trial at Maidstone Crown Court. During the trial, prosecutors laid out a chilling picture of betrayal and greed. Detective Chief Inspector Emma Laurie told the court that Alan had shown Mercer kindness and generosity only for her to repay him with a brutal knife attack. The jury rejected any suggestion of innocence and found Nina Mercer guilty of murder on the 14th of March, 2025. On the 18th of March, 2025, Mercer was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 17 years before she can be considered for parole. The judge made it clear that her actions were deliberate, selfish, and callous. Lee Robinson was cleared of assisting an offender but was convicted of theft and fraud, receiving a sentence of 2 years and 4 months. At number 4 in this countdown, we have Elizabeth Sweeney, a 36-year-old woman whose actions inside a high-rise flat in Aberdeen left a family shattered and a court struggling to comprehend the level of violence involved. What happened to 49-year-old Neil Jolly in June 2023 was not a momentary loss of control, but a prolonged and sustained assault that ended his life. Neil Jolly, a father of 3, was attacked inside his flat at Marischal Court between the evening of the 22nd of June and the early hours of the following morning. Over the course of the assault, Sweeney repeatedly punched and kicked him, striking him again and again with a kettle. Medical experts later told the court that Neil suffered more than 70 blunt force injuries. His injuries were so severe that they were likened to the kind of trauma seen in a high-impact road collision or a fall from height. He also sustained fractured ribs and damage to his throat. He did not stand a chance. Rather than calling for help, Sweeney spent the next 3 days attempting to erase what she had done. The court heard how she soaked Neil's body with water and tried to clean blood from the bathroom and the kettle used in the attack. CCTV footage showed her moving about normally in the days that followed, behaving as though nothing had happened. It was not until the following Monday that police were alerted and Neil's body was finally discovered. At trial, Sweeney denied murder and claimed she had acted in self-defense, alleging that Neil had assaulted her while she slept. The jury did not accept her account. After a 10-day trial at the High Court in Aberdeen, they found her guilty of murder. Jurors were also satisfied that there had been prior malice and ill will, with evidence showing Sweeney had assaulted Neil on at least 2 occasions in the weeks before his death. The crime was further aggravated by domestic abuse, as the pair were partners or former partners. During sentencing on the 31st of March 2025, Judge Andrew Miller described the assault as prolonged and brutal. He told Sweeney that the injuries she inflicted were catastrophic and fatal. She was handed a mandatory life sentence with a minimum term of 18 years. While the court acknowledged her difficult background, criminal history, and long-standing struggles with addiction, the judge made it clear these factors could not outweigh the severity of the crime. Statements from Neil Jolly's mother, son, and sister spoke of an enormous and enduring loss, made even more painful by the days his body was left undiscovered. Police later said they hoped the sentence would bring some comfort to the family. At number 5 in this countdown, we have Michelle Ramage, a 43-year-old woman whose name is now permanently tied to one of the most brutal cases to come before the Scottish courts in recent years. Her crimes unfolded in Ayr, South Ayrshire. And what happened behind the closed doors of a flat in Nursery Hall in March 2023 was nothing short of sustained human cruelty. Susan Turner, a 41-year-old mother of 3, was lured into that flat and never walked out. Over a prolonged and vicious attack, Ramage and her co-accused Ryan Hill set upon Susan with a collection of everyday objects turned into weapons. A golf club, scissors, mugs, a baseball bat, a dog chain, a radio, and a machete were all used. Susan was stripped, dragged across the floor, choked with a dressing gown cord, and beaten repeatedly. By the end of the assault, she had suffered more than 130 injuries. Prosecutors said there was barely a part of her body left untouched. The motive that emerged during the investigation was jealousy. Susan had been spending time near Ramage's partner, Jason Bell, and witnesses described Ramage growing increasingly angry and possessive in the days leading up to the attack. Shortly before the slaying, Ramage confronted Susan directly. One witness even warned police that the situation was spiraling out of control, fearing someone was going to be seriously harmed. That fear became reality. When officers forced entry into the flat, they were met with the overwhelming smell of blood and the sight of Susan's body lying on the floor. Her hair had been ripped out in clumps. She had been scored repeatedly, beaten across the body, and left almost unclothed. During the assault, Susan begged to be let go, but her pleas were ignored. Michelle Ramage pleaded guilty to murder in January 2025. Her sentencing took place at the High Court in Glasgow on the 13th of March, 2025. Lord Mulholland described the attack as akin to torture, stating it was clearly designed to demean and disfigure Susan as a woman. Ramage was handed a life sentence with a minimum term of 22 years, reduced from a higher starting point due to her early guilty plea. As Ramage stood in the dock, the judge made it clear there was no promise of freedom at the end of that minimum term. Any release would depend entirely on the parole board, if it ever came at all. At number 6 on our countdown is Christine Kekkonen, 37, from Baltonsborough, Somerset. She was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 15 years for the murder of her husband, Henri Kekkonen, 41, at their home on May 9, 2024. The fatal stabbing occurred between 4 and 20 past 4 in the afternoon while Henri lay in bed. Immediately after the attack, Kekkonen texted her mother, "Mom, please get the police here now, please. I've done something awful." Emergency services arrived within 15 minutes, but Henri died at the scene. A knife used in the attack was recovered, having been deliberately hidden on the side of the bed. During her trial at Bristol Crown Court in November, Kekkonen claimed she had not intended to murder her husband. The jury rejected this, finding her guilty of murder. The court heard that Henri had been her primary carer despite her history of anxiety, depression, and auditory hallucinations. Judge Julian Lambert described Henri as kind and caring, and noted that hiding the knife showed deliberation, undermining Kekkonen's claims of accidental harm. Henri's father, Olavi Kekkonen, expressed his devastation. He recalled being told by police that his son had died, a moment that shattered his world. Despite the grief, he did not seek vengeance, struggling instead to understand how Christine, who had never shown violence, could commit such an act. Judge Lambert described Kekkonen's mindset as deluded, noting she believed Henri had been coercive and controlling. In reality, Henri had always supported her, prioritizing her welfare. The judge concluded that her mental health issues did not justify the fatal stabbing, which was deliberate and caused irreversible harm. Christine Kekkonen will serve a minimum of 15 years before parole eligibility. At number 7 on our countdown is Karolina Żurawska, a 42-year-old woman from Swansea, Wales, who was handed an indefinite hospital order after pleading guilty to the manslaughter of her 6-year-old son, Alexander Żurawski, by reason of diminished responsibility. The horrifying events took place on August 29, 2024, at their home on 2WM du Close Gendro, Swansea, where Alexander was found with a severe neck injury, a handsaw lying at his side, and his mother kneeling beside him. The court was told that Alexander, who had been bravely recovering from a brain tumor, was partially sighted and relied on a cane to move around, making the incident even more heart-wrenching. Earlier that day, Żurawska also attempted to murder her 67-year-old father, Krzysztof Siwi, in a shocking display of violence. She reportedly hugged him, told him she loved him, and then launched 3 knife attacks, leaving him to fend for his survival. Her father, terrified, managed to disarm her and contacted another daughter in Poland, who urged him to return to the house. Upon his return, police cars were already converging on the property after neighbors reported screams, leading to the grim discovery of Alexander's death. 3 independent psychiatric experts concluded that Żurawska was experiencing a psychotic episode brought on by paranoid schizophrenia at the time of the attacks. She believed she was being instructed by demonic voices, which triggered the unthinkable acts. During sentencing at Swansea Crown Court in March, Judge Paul Thomas KC acknowledged the immense pressure she had faced as a single mother caring for a disabled child, describing her as a devoted and loving mother. He was clear that her actions were entirely out of character, and stressed that she was not a wicked mother, emphasizing that the tragedy was driven by severe mental illness rather than malice. Judge Thomas accepted the prosecution's recommendation of manslaughter by reason of diminished responsibility and imposed an indefinite hospital order under the Mental Health Act. This means Żurawska will remain in a secure psychiatric facility until she is deemed no longer a risk to herself or others. The court heard harrowing testimony of her loving care for Alexander, who had faced immense medical challenges from birth. Despite her illness, she had been fiercely committed to ensuring his well-being, demonstrating extraordinary dedication as a single parent. Alexander's family spoke after the sentencing, painting a picture of a bright, clever, and kind-hearted child whose life, though brief, was filled with love and courage. They recalled his eagerness to help with household tasks, his maturity beyond his 6 years, and his ability to communicate fluently in both English and Polish. At number 8 in our countdown is Erin McNeely, a 35-year-old woman from Stevenage, Hertfordshire, who was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 16 years for the murder of her partner Peter Lynch, 61. The fatal attack occurred on June 19, 2024 in Walden End, Stevenage, following a heated argument over just £10. The judge described the assault as savage and brutal, noting that it was fueled by both individuals' addiction to crack substances, with McNeely admitting she had allowed her anger and craving for illegal substances to take control. The violent incident unfolded late at night, with police called to reports of a serious assault at approximately 11:50 p.m. CCTV and witness accounts revealed that the argument quickly escalated into deadly violence. McNeely, armed with a knife, stabbed Lynch in a series of rapid strikes that pierced vital organs. Despite immediate medical attention, Lynch succumbed to his injuries shortly after arriving at the hospital. The scale of the attack shocked both neighbors and the wider community, with authorities describing the scene as a grim reflection of the couple's toxic, illegal, substance-fueled lifestyle. McNeely initially admitted to manslaughter but denied murder during her trial at Huntingdon Crown Court, which concluded in February 2025. Prosecutors painted a clear picture of a woman who, in a moment of greed and rage, allowed a young individual's dispute over money to escalate into a fatal attack. Judge Mark Bishop emphasized the toxic nature of the relationship, noting that both McNeely and Lynch had histories of violence and addiction. He stressed that despite her claims of regret and mental health difficulties, there was no doubt that McNeely intended to slay her partner. During the trial, evidence from witnesses in the local crack community provided a stark insight into the degrading circumstances surrounding the lives of both McNeely and Lynch. The court heard how disputes over small amounts of money often spiraled into physical confrontations, yet the ferocity and suddenness of McNeely's attack marked it as exceptional in its cruelty. Judge Bishop stated, "A witness said you were off your head. It was a savage, sudden, and brutal attack. I am sure that when you stabbed him, you intended to slay him." The sentencing hearing on February 28, 2025, brought together the families of both the victim and the perpetrator. Detective Inspector Lee Martin, who led the investigation, described the case as complex, highlighting the meticulous work of officers from the Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire, and Hertfordshire Major Crime Unit. He praised the families of McNeely and Lynch for their compassion and respect throughout the trial, calling their conduct humble in the face of tragedy. Judge Bishop took into account mitigating factors presented by McNeely's legal team, including her mental health difficulties and the history of mutual violence in the relationship. However, he concluded that these factors could not outweigh the deliberate and lethal nature of the assault. He ruled that the life sentence with a 16-year minimum term before parole eligibility was appropriate, reflecting the severity of the crime and its devastating impact on Lynch's loved ones. The judge noted that while both individuals had contributed to a volatile environment, it was McNeely's decision to escalate a young individual's argument into a fatal attack that defined the crime. At number 9 in our countdown is Kirsty Carless, a 33-year-old woman from Cannock, Staffordshire, who was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years for the brutal murder of her ex-partner, Lewis Price, 31. The attack took place on Christmas Day, 2024, at Price's parents' home in Norton Keynes, and was driven by a toxic mix of jealousy, anger, and substance abuse. A unanimous jury at Stafford Crown Court found Carlos guilty of murder and possession of an offensive weapon on July 30, 2025, with sentencing following the very next day. On Christmas Eve, 2024, when Carlos had been drinking heavily and using hard substances with a male friend, after a night of alcohol and illegal substances, she was sent a screenshot of Price's Tinder profile, which ignited a violent outburst fueled by jealousy and rage. She returned home, retrieved a kitchen knife, and then took another taxi to Price's parents' house in the early hours of Christmas morning. CCTV footage captured her entering the property at approximately 3 o'clock and immediately stabbing Price, chasing him around the garden while brandishing the knife, in a terrifying scene witnessed only by the silent night around Elm Road. Price, a devoted father of 6, had previously been classified as being at very high risk of domestic abuse. In November 2024, he had been strangled and physically assaulted by Carlos in a prior incident and was on police bail at the time of his death. The prosecution highlighted the calculated nature of the Christmas Day attack, noting that Carlos's violent actions were deliberate and premeditated, despite her later claims that she could not recall the stabbing. Judge Mr. Justice Chowdhury described the attack as an act of premeditated violence and noted that Carlos had shown no remorse for her actions. The trial at Stafford Crown Court revealed harrowing details of the final moments of Price's life. CCTV footage showed Carlos running up the front path and stalking him around the garden before delivering the fatal blow. She fled the scene in less than 2 minutes, anxious and sweating, before confessing to the murder at her parents' house. Despite her attempts to downplay responsibility, the evidence painted a clear picture. The stabbing was deliberate, and Carlos had armed herself with the intent to cause serious harm. The jury also convicted her of assault occasioning actual bodily harm by a majority verdict for her earlier attack on Price in November 2024, though she was cleared of intentional strangulation in that incident. During sentencing, the emotional impact on Price's family was laid bare. His mother, Eleanor, described her son as beautiful and said their hearts had been ripped apart by his violent and unexpected death. Judge Chowdhury highlighted aggravating factors, including Carlos's history of violence, the prior abuse inflicted on Price, and the fact that she had chosen a time when her victim was surrounded by family, demonstrating the cold and calculated nature of the act. The judge emphasized that Carlos's lack of remorse and her attempt to distance herself from the consequences further aggravated the crime. He concluded that the life sentence with a 25-year minimum term was the only appropriate response, reflecting both the severity of the murder and the lasting impact on the grieving family. At number 10 in our countdown, we have Stephanie McLagan, a 39-year-old woman from Gainsborough who was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 18 years for the fatal stabbing of her ex-girlfriend, Jillian Connolly, 44. The conviction came after a 2-week trial at Lincoln Crown Court, where a jury returned a guilty verdict on October 8, 2025, following a heated legal battle in which McLagan denied delivering the fatal blow. The court, however, heard compelling witness testimony and forensic evidence that left no room for doubt about her involvement. The attack occurred in the early hours of July 28, 2024, at a friend's house on Wheeldon Street, where the former partners became embroiled in a heated argument. The pair had been together for over 20 years, and tensions over personal grievances escalated into violence. McLagan retrieved a kitchen knife and stabbed Connolly. A home office pathologist described the wound as devastating with no chance of survival in this setting, highlighting the severity and immediacy of the assault. The aftermath of the crime revealed a coordinated effort to mislead the authorities. Jade Glover, 28, who resided at the property, contacted Stephen Lowther, 45, to help move Connolly's body from inside the house to the street, attempting to fabricate a scenario that the stabbing had occurred outdoors. Police quickly uncovered the truth through hundreds of hours of CCTV footage, which clearly showed the attack taking place indoors. Both Glover and Lowther later pleaded guilty to perverting the course of justice and are awaiting sentencing. This deliberate attempt to manipulate the investigation only underscored the callousness of the crime. Multiple kitchen knives were seized from the property, and forensic analysis confirmed that one knife bore both Connolly's and McLagan's DNA, providing crucial evidence that linked McLagan directly to the weapon. At sentencing on October 9, 2025, Judge James House KC emphasized that while the jury could not definitively prove McLagan's intent to slay, it was clear she intended to cause life-threatening harm. The judge cited aggravating factors, including the presence of 2 children in the home at the time, and McLagan's prior convictions for violence and possession of offensive weapons, describing the attack as any unnecessary loss of life and a profound tragedy. During the trial, it emerged that McLagan had recently given birth while in custody, and her defense counsel argued that this personal circumstance should be considered in mitigation. However, the prosecution argued forcefully that the attack came totally out of the blue and that only McLagan could explain her motive. Witnesses, including Susan Wasley, testified to the terrifying scene on Wheeldon Street, describing Connolly bleeding at the base of the stairs after being stabbed during a struggle in the kitchen. The court heard that the incident was sparked by a dispute over Connolly's new pregnancy and relationship with a different partner, though the ultimate violence was entirely McLagan's doing. Judge House described the incident as a rapid escalation, occurring in a matter of moments, with only one entry wound but fatal consequences. He also acknowledged the emotional toll on McLagan's newborn, noting that the child would never have the opportunity to grow up with their mother. The courtroom was left with the stark reality that 20 years of shared history had ended in a single, irreversible act of violence, leaving Connolly's family and friends to grapple with the sudden and senseless loss. The judge reiterated the seriousness of the crime, highlighting the vulnerability of the children present and McLagan's history of violence. He concluded that the life sentence with an 18-year minimum term was appropriate, reflecting the gravity of the attack and ensuring that McLagan would face long-term accountability for her actions. At number 11, we have Gemma Watts, a 49-year-old woman from South London who stands out for her role in a murder that shocked the city and revealed a depravity few could imagine. Watts, along with her partner, Stephen Sampson, lured 38-year-old Sarah Mayhew, a woman she met through a dating site, into a premeditated trap on the 8th of March, 2024, at Sampson's flat in Sutton. What followed was a crime that combined sexual obsession, sadism, and meticulous planning, culminating in Mayhew's death and dismemberment, a horrifying end to a life with so much left to live. The case emerged from a web of manipulation and cruelty. Prosecutors revealed a chilling premeditation, citing messages exchanged between Watts and Sampson in which Watts wrote, "Only if it's a deal she ain't leaving in one piece," to which Sampson replied, "Okay." These texts left little doubt of their intent. In court, the couple's actions were described as a bloodthirsty and wicked fantasy, motivated by sexual and sadistic impulses. CCTV footage and forensic evidence showed Watts purchasing cleaning products and Sampson acquiring tools such as a hacksaw and a bucket, underscoring the methodical nature of their plan to slay, dismember, and conceal the body. Mayhew's tragic fate unfolded the night she visited Sampson's flat, expecting a normal encounter. Instead, she encountered a couple whose fantasies had crossed the line into real-world violence. DNA evidence later confirmed traces of her blood in the flat, and her body parts were discovered over subsequent weeks across South London, including Rowdown Fields and the River Wandle. Witness statements and the digital trail left by the defendants helped police reconstruct the crime, showing that Watts and Sampson had gone to extreme lengths to avoid detection, disposing of body parts and cleaning the scene, an effort that only highlighted the cold-blooded planning behind the attack. During their trial at the Old Bailey, Watts and Sampson pleaded guilty to murder and perverting the course of justice. Sampson, who was on license following a prior murder conviction from 1998, was handed a whole-life order, meaning he will never be released from prison. Watts received a life sentence with a minimum term of, along with 5 years for perverting the course of justice, to run concurrently. The judge emphasized that Watts had been equally involved in the planning and execution of Mayhew's murder, describing her demeanor in court as chillingly unconcerned, even referring to Sampson as her evil twin during proceedings. The case also highlighted the broader consequences of Sampson's earlier release on license, prompting the Ministry of Justice to initiate a serious further offense review. Detective Chief Inspector Martin Thorpe of the Specialist Crime Command noted the profound impact on Mayhew's family, who had lost a daughter and mother in a crime that was entirely avoidable. Mayhew's mother, Angela, said in a victim impact statement, "It breaks my heart she is not around," while her father, David, expressed the enduring pain and confusion caused by the senseless slaying, stating, "I ask myself the same question all the time. Why did you have to slay her? Maybe I will never know." Prosecutor Aisling Hossain, speaking after sentencing, described the murder as horrific and unthinkable, emphasizing the couple's shared depravity. Sarah Mayhew tragically died at the hands of two people who were as depraved, cruel, and wicked as each other, she said. The prosecution highlighted the stream of messages, voice notes, and CCTV evidence that traced the calculated and callous planning that led to her death, demonstrating that this was not a crime of passion but one of deliberate cruelty. The sentencing of Watts and Sampson brought some measure of justice, though the pain of the loss remains immeasurable. Mayhew's two children, aged 12 and 15 at the time, were left without a mother, while friends and family were confronted with the horrifying details of a murder driven by twisted fantasies. Watts will spend at least 30 years behind bars, serving a sentence that reflects the severity of her actions. But for Sarah Mayhew's family, no punishment can fill the void left by her violent and untimely death. At number 12 in this countdown, we find Hope Rowe, a 33-year-old whose brutal attack on a mother at a child's birthday party shocked East London and left a community reeling. The events of that night in Stepney Green, on September 15, 2024, revealed a horrifying blend of impulsive rage and calculated violence, forever altering the lives of Charlotte Lawler's family. The incident began with what seemed like a trivial dispute over a missing set of keys during a birthday celebration for a shared nephew. Rowe of Piazza Walk, Aldgate, initially left the party but returned later, sending a threatening message to Lawler branding her a Witnesses later told the court that Rowe then launched her attack using a knife from the birthday cake. She plunged the blade into Lawler's body as she attempted to leave the property, shielding herself with her partner Lee Holder, who was later convicted of perverting the course of justice for helping her dispose of the weapon and flee the scene. The attack was witnessed by children and adults alike, a fact that underscored the senseless cruelty of her actions. Lawler, a 31-year-old mother described by her family as vibrant and full of life, was pronounced dead shortly after paramedics arrived. The murder weapon, a cake knife, was never recovered, but forensic evidence played a critical role in securing the conviction. Investigators discovered a voicemail left accidentally by Holder on Roe's phone in which she coldly said "good" after being told she had slain Lawlor. The combination of witness testimony and this chilling digital evidence painted a damning picture of Roe's intent, leaving no room for her later claims of diminished responsibility due to a personality disorder. Roe's 6-week trial at Inner London Crown Court concluded on June 13, 2025. The prosecution argued convincingly that her actions demonstrated a deliberate intention to slay, with Judge Freya Newberry highlighting that there had been no provocation from Lawlor. Roe's attempt to mitigate her culpability by citing emotional instability and a personality disorder was rejected by the jury, who unanimously found her guilty. Her partner, Holder, 38, was also convicted for assisting in the cover-up and instructed to dispose of the knife, actions that the court described as calculated and complicit. At sentencing on July 9, 2025, Judge Newberry imposed a life sentence with a minimum term of 23 years for Roe, emphasizing the premeditated nature of the attack and the complete absence of provocation. Holder received 16 months for perverting the course of justice, reflecting his role in facilitating the escape and concealment of evidence. Lawlor's family delivered heartfelt impact statements in court, painting a picture of a woman whose light had been brutally extinguished. Her mother, Tammy, and grandmother, Sharon John, described a gaping hole left in their lives, while her 12-year-old son, Riley, created a video tribute declaring, "Love you, Mum. Rest in peace. We'll never forget you." Detective Sergeant Dean Musgrove, who led the investigation for the Metropolitan Police's Specialist Crime North Unit, spoke of the senselessness and brutality of the crime. He described the trauma experienced by witnesses, particularly the children present, and noted the extraordinary role forensic technology played in ensuring justice. Hope Roe launched a brutal attack at what should have been a joyous occasion, he said. Our thoughts remain with Charlotte Lawlor's family, who have endured the unimaginable loss of a loved one in such violent circumstances. The case also revealed the callous mindset of Roe and Holder in the immediate aftermath. After the stabbing, the pair fled the scene in Holder's vehicle. A voicemail, left accidentally while Holder was driving, captured Roe expressing satisfaction at having slain Lawlor, instructing Holder to dispose of the knife and avoid the police. This recording, coupled with witness statements, provided irrefutable evidence of both the murder and the subsequent cover-up. The murder of Charlotte Lawlor is remembered not just for its shocking violence, but for the complete betrayal of trust and the impact on innocent lives. The birthday party, meant to be a celebration of family, became the scene of an unthinkable tragedy. Hope Roe will now serve a long minimum term in prison, but the trauma, grief, and void left in Lawlor's family cannot be undone. Riley, her young son, and all who knew Charlotte will carry the memory of that night and the life stolen from them forever. At number 13 in this countdown, we come to Amy Betrow, a 45-year-old woman from Wisconsin whose actions turned a bitter family dispute into an international assassination plot. This is a case that stretches across continents, driven by obsession, loyalty to a man she barely knew, and a willingness to pull the trigger herself. In August 2019, Betrow flew from the United States to the United Kingdom, not as a tourist, but as part of a carefully planned conspiracy to take a life. She had been recruited by Mohammed Nazir, a man from Derbyshire she met through an online dating app. Their relationship, conducted long distance, became entangled in a long-running feud between Nazir's family and the family of Sikander Ali. The dispute had already turned violent, with Nazir and his father, Mohammed Aslam, injured during a confrontation at a clothing store owned by Ali's father. What followed was a decision to seek revenge in the most extreme way possible. To avoid detection, Betrayal disguised herself in an e-cab and traveled to South Yardley, Birmingham. CCTV footage later showed her calmly approaching Sikandar Ali outside his home, a gun clearly visible in her hand. She raised the weapon and attempted to shoot him at point-blank range. But fate intervened. The firearm jammed. In that split second, Ali managed to escape, getting back into his car and driving away, unaware just how close he had come to death. The danger did not end there. Hours later, Betrayal returned to the family home. This time, she fired 3 bullets through the bedroom windows. Glass shattered, walls were damaged, and terror ripped through the household, but miraculously, no one was physically injured. It was, as the court would later hear, pure chance that no one was murdered. Betrayal then fled the country, vanishing before police could close in. For years, she remained on the run. After leaving the UK, she returned briefly to the United States before eventually resurfacing in Armenia. It would take 5 years, international cooperation, and extensive investigative work before she was finally arrested in 2024. In January 2025, she was extradited back to the United Kingdom to face justice. Her trial lasted 3 weeks and concluded on the 12th of August, 2025. The jury found her guilty of conspiracy to murder along with firearms offenses. Prosecutors made it clear that this was not a case of passive involvement or blind obedience. Betrayal had not simply agreed to a plan. She had traveled across the world, armed herself, and attempted to murder a man with her own hands. On the 21st of August, 2025, Betrayal stood before the court for sentencing. Judge Simon Drew KC described the plot as complex and well-planned. He told her plainly that it was only a matter of chance that Sikandar Ali was not murdered. The judge emphasized that Betrayal had played a leading role, calling her the gunwoman of the conspiracy. She was the one prepared to fire the weapon, and she did so on 2 separate occasions. Throughout the sentencing, Betrayal showed no visible emotion. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison for conspiracy to murder. That sentence was accompanied by 6 years for possessing a firearm with intent to cause fear of violence and 2 years for illegally importing ammunition, all to run concurrently. She will not be eligible to be considered for parole until the 14th of March, 2044. Nazir and his father were also convicted in connection with the plot. Nazir received a 32-year sentence, while Aslam was sentenced to 10 years. Together, their convictions closed the chapter on a conspiracy that nearly claimed an innocent life. At number 14 in this countdown, we have Amy Pugh, a 34-year-old woman whose lies did not just follow violence, but were carefully woven into it. On the evening of Tuesday, the 22nd of March, 2022, a violent altercation unfolded inside a home on Aston Drive in Newport, Shropshire. Amy Pugh and her estranged husband Kyle Pugh had a relationship that was already fractured, volatile, and poisoned by alcohol and substance abuse. That night, the argument escalated into physical violence. The court heard that during the confrontation, Amy struck Kyle. He struck back, and she then pulled him down, placing her hands around his neck. What followed was deliberate and sustained neck compression. Kyle was left critically injured. Instead of immediately calling for help, Amy waited. For approximately 20 minutes, she made multiple phone calls to her father, including a 6-minute video call while Kyle lay dying. When she finally contacted emergency services, her voice told a different story. During the call, she could be heard pleading, "Kyle, wake up! Why have you done this?" She told paramedics that Kyle had hurt himself with a belt. By the time help arrived at around 9:15 p.m., she was performing CPR, maintaining the appearance of panic and shock. Kyle Pugh was taken to Princess Royal Hospital, but the injuries were too severe. He died the following day. A post-mortem examination shattered Amy's version of events. Pathologists found fatal neck compression injuries, along with a fractured eye socket and nose, injuries entirely inconsistent with ended life. The truth was unavoidable. What had been presented as a tragic self-inflicted act was, in fact, a slaying. Amy Pugh was arrested on the 1st of April, 2022, on suspicion of murder, though the investigation would take years to reach its conclusion. She was formally charged in November 2024 and stood trial at Stafford Crown Court in June 2025. Prosecutors laid out a chilling sequence of events, arguing that Amy's actions were not only violent, but calculated. They told the jury she had deliberately delayed calling for help and fabricated a self-hurt narrative in an attempt to escape responsibility. The court also heard about Amy's past behavior. In November 2024, she had already been convicted of arson for setting fire to Kyle's workshop on the 15th of October 2021. For that offense, she received a 19-month suspended sentence. It painted a disturbing picture of escalating hostility and destruction long before Kyle's life was taken. Judge Christina Montgomery Casey did not mince her words. She described Amy Pugh's actions as cynical and cruel, stating that the violence was followed by a conscious effort to deceive emergency services and investigators. The judge spoke of a toxic relationship fueled by alcohol and substances, but made it clear that none of it excused what happened that night. The attempt to disguise a murder as ended life, she said, added a further layer of cruelty. In June 2025, the jury found Amy Pugh guilty of murder. On Thursday, the 5th of September, 2025, she was sentenced at Stafford Crown Court to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 14 years, minus time already served on remand. Kyle Pugh was just 29 years old. He was a well-known local artist, MC, and the founder of Design Dudes UK. His family described him as a visionary in design, a beloved son, brother, and friend whose creativity and energy lit up every room he entered. At number 15 in this countdown we have Sheely Ran Charagwati, a 30-year-old woman from Hemel Hempstead, whose actions lead to the death of her 2-year-old daughter, Rosalind. On the afternoon of Sunday, the 14th of April, 2024, emergency services were alerted after Charagwati placed a call to police at around 4:40 p.m. Her words were chilling. She told the operator that she believed she had her child. Officers and paramedics rushed to her address on Juniper Square, Hemel Hempstead, where they found little Rosalind unresponsive. Despite desperate efforts to save her, the 2-year-old was rushed to hospital, where she was pronounced dead a short time later. The court would later hear that Rosalind had been attacked with a plastic bag. As detectives began piecing together what had happened inside that home, a deeply troubling picture emerged. Charagwati had been involved in a bitter custody dispute with Rosalind's father, Washington, and had lost custody of her daughter months before the slaying. Prosecutors told the jury that this loss became the emotional trigger for what followed. They argued that the murder was driven by what they described as spousal revenge, an act intended to cause the maximum possible pain to Rosalind's father. Charagwati was arrested and charged with murder the day after the incident, following an investigation led by the Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire, and Hertfordshire Major Crime Unit. During the early stages of the legal process, she admitted responsibility for her daughter's death, but attempted to avoid a murder conviction. At the start of her trial at Luton Crown Court, she pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, citing mental health struggles including stress and depression. However, prosecutors were unwavering, insisting that the evidence supported a charge of murder. The jury heard how Charagwati had previously been described as a devoted mother, a detail that made the case even harder to comprehend. While the court acknowledged her mental health difficulties, it was not enough to outweigh the prosecution's case. After hearing all the evidence, the jury rejected her plea and, on the 17th of April 2025, found her guilty of murder. The verdict confirmed what many feared from the outset, that this was not a tragic accident, but a deliberate act. On the 23rd of April 2025, Charagwati returned to court to face sentencing. The judge told her that the murder of a defenseless individual represented one of the gravest crimes imaginable. He accepted the prosecution's argument that revenge played a central role in her actions and said that Rosalind had been used as a weapon in an adult conflict. Charagwati was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 16 years before she can be considered for release. The most devastating words of the day came not from the judge, but from Rosalind's father. Speaking after the sentencing, Washington said Charagwati had put him through every parent's worst nightmare. He described Rosalind as joyful, playful, funny, and full of love, a little girl who brought light wherever she went. At number 17 in this countdown, we have Cara Alexander, a 47-year-old woman from Cornwallis Road in Dagenham, whose case left an entire nation shaken by the sheer vulnerability of her victims. Elijah Thomas was just 2 years old. His older brother Marley Thomas was 5. On the 15th of December 2022, Cara Alexander murdered both of her sons by drowning them. The following day, their father arrived at the house and made a discovery no parent should ever have to face. Elijah and Marley were found lying side by side in their shared bunk bed, dressed in clean pajamas, placed carefully together after their lives had already been taken. Emergency services were called at around 2 in the afternoon on the 16th of December, but both boys were pronounced at the scene. Post-mortem examinations confirmed that drowning was the cause of death for both children. At sentencing, the court heard how Alexander had deliberately held each child underwater for up to 1 or 2 minutes, long enough to ensure they could not survive. Afterward, she dried them, changed their clothes, and laid them gently in bed. The judge described this as a chilling sequence of actions that demonstrated intention, not accident. These were defenseless young individuals entirely dependent on her, and the betrayal of trust was profound. Following the murder, Alexander fled the house. She was arrested nearby a short time later after police launched an urgent search. Detectives from the Metropolitan Police Specialist Crime Command began a meticulous investigation, reviewing CCTV and doorbell footage from the area and forensically examining Alexander's phone. She was charged on the 19th of December 2022 with 2 counts of murder. Her trial at Kingston Crown Court lasted 3 weeks, and on Friday, the 21st of February, she was convicted. During sentencing on Friday, the 11th of April 2025, Mr. Justice Benathan addressed the court in stark terms. He explained that Alexander had been in a cannabis-induced psychotic state at the time of the murder, brought on by weeks of heavy skunk use. While this was acknowledged as a factor, it did not excuse what she had done. The judge stressed the extreme vulnerability of Elijah and Marley and described the murders as a catastrophic breach of maternal responsibility. He sentenced Cara Alexander to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 24 years before she can be considered for release. At number 18 in this countdown, we have Maureen Rickards, a 50-year-old woman whose cruelty did not end with murder her husband, but continued in the calculated, almost chilling way she tried to erase him entirely. Jeremy Rickards was 65 years old, a geologist described as gentle, supportive, and increasingly frail. Behind the doors of their home in Canterbury, he lived under sustained abuse for years. The court heard that he was largely defenseless, subjected to physical violence, verbal threats, and humiliation at the hands of his wife of more than 20 years. This was a marriage defined by fear, and by a man slowly worn down inside the place where he should have been safest. In early June of 2024, that abuse turned fatal. Jeremy Rickards was murdered in what the judge later described as a ferocious attack. He suffered 5 stab wounds, including 2 that pierced his body. Evidence showed he had also been choked, and that older injuries, including fractured ribs and bruising, were present on his body. These injuries told a devastating story. This was not the first time violence had been inflicted on him, only the last. After slaying her husband, Maureen Rickards wrapped his body in bin bags, placed him inside a holdall, and concealed him within the property. Later, the body was moved into the garden of their home on St. Martin's Road and hidden beneath grass cuttings. She even directed unsuspecting gardeners to dump more clippings in the same spot, deliberately burying his remains deeper. It was an act that showed chilling awareness and intent. Then came the lies. Using Jeremy's phone, Rickards messaged their daughter, claiming he had traveled to Saudi Arabia. When the messages seemed wrong, suspicion grew. Days later, she escalated the deception, claiming Jeremy had hurt himself abroad. Alarmed and confused, the daughter reported him missing. On July 11, 2024, police searching the garden were hit by an overpowering odor that made officers feel physically ill. Beneath the grass cuttings, they found the holdall. Inside was Jeremy Rickards' decomposing body. When confronted, Rickards reportedly asked, "What body?" The investigation exposed the full scale of her deception. Rickards had used her husband's bank card after his death to buy cleaning products, likely to remove blood from the carpet. Blood stains were found in cupboards where the body had been stored and even on the ceiling of the flat below. During the 2-week trial at Canterbury Crown Court, jurors were shown videos Rickards herself had recorded over their 27-year marriage, capturing her abusing, threatening, and beating Jeremy, even expressing an intention to slay him. On March 13, 2025, she was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years. She did not attend her sentencing. For Jeremy's family, there was no remorse, no apology, only the knowledge that a gentleman was terrorized, murdered, and lied about until the truth could no longer be buried. At number 19 in this countdown, we have Christina Howell, a 37-year-old woman from Easton, Bristol. On the afternoon of September 29, 2023, 61-year-old Hubert Brown, affectionately known as Isaac, was doing nothing extraordinary. He was peacefully sitting on a wall along Grosvenor Road in St. Paul's, Bristol, at around 3:20 p.m. Within moments, his was brutally and inexplicably murdered. Witnesses watched as Christina Howell approached with what they later described as real purpose. As she closed the distance, she shouted racially offensive abuse. Then, without warning or provocation, she produced a knife and stabbed Isaac once. That single wound was fatal. Members of the public reacted immediately. Some rushed Isaac to hospital by car in a desperate attempt to save him. Others bravely restrained and disarmed Howell at the scene. Police were called at 3:19 p.m. Officers arrived within minutes, and Howell was arrested at 3:26 p.m., initially on suspicion of causing grievous bodily harm. Tragically, Isaac's injuries proved unsurvivable. He later died from the stab wound, and Howell was rearrested on suspicion of murder. The shock rippled far beyond Grosvenor Road. Isaac was well known, deeply loved, and respected in his community. As the case unfolded, Howell's mental health became central to the proceedings. The court heard that she had struggled with severe mental illness for more than 20 years and had been diagnosed with a chronic, relapsing, and treatment-resistant mental disorder. At the time of the attack, she was living in supported accommodation and was subject to a community treatment order. Just hours before the murder, Howell had been visited by her community mental health nurse. During that appointment, she was seen holding a lock knife. The nurse insisted the meeting could not continue until the knife was removed. Shortly afterward, Howell began making stabbing motions and expressed a delusional intention to slay a Jamaican illegal substance dealer. She then abruptly left her home. The nurse called emergency services at 3:16 p.m. to raise serious concerns. 3 minutes later, Isaac was attacked. The knife Howell used had been ordered online and concealed inside her clothing. Psychiatrists later agreed that she had armed herself while deeply unwell and acting under paranoid, racist delusions. At Bristol Crown Court, Howell admitted manslaughter by reason of diminished responsibility, a plea accepted by the Crown Prosecution Service after an extensive review of medical evidence from independent experts. All 4 psychiatrists agreed her mental illness had substantially impaired her judgment, rational decision-making, and self-control, and that she would not have carried out the attack had she not been mentally ill. On Friday, April 25, 2025, Howell was sentenced. His Honor Judge Peter Blair KC described the slaying as an appalling crime of manslaughter and was unequivocal about its nature. He stated plainly that it was a racist attack, made even more serious by the language used and the harm inflicted on the wider community. Rather than a prison sentence, Howell was given a hospital order under Section 37 of the Mental Health Act, with restrictions under Section 41. This means she will be detained in a high-security hospital such as Rampton and will not be released unless and until experts determine it is safe to move her gradually through lower levels of security, a process that could take many years. An indefinite criminal behavior order was also imposed, banning her from entering the city and county of Bristol. Judge Blair acknowledged that prison might appear more fitting to many, but ruled that incarceration would neither protect the public nor address the danger Howell poses without intensive psychiatric treatment. For Isaac's family, the sentence did not bring the justice they felt he deserved. They described their loss as unbearable and the slaying as cruel, senseless, and racially motivated. Police and prosecutors confirmed the case was treated as a race hate crime from the outset, a point repeatedly emphasized in court. At number 20 in this countdown, we have Joanna Ronska, a 51-year-old woman from Wrexham, North Wales. On the evening of October 23, 2023, emergency services were called to a first-floor flat in the Kaya Park area of Wrexham. The caller was Joanna Ronska. Her claim was chillingly simple. Her partner, 40-year-old Marcin Koziol, had injured himself with a knife. When police arrived shortly before 6:15 p.m., they were led to a bedroom where Marcin lay bleeding heavily on the bed, a deep stab wound to his chest. Paramedics fought to save him, but it was already too late. Marcin Koziol was pronounced dead at the scene. Almost immediately, Joanna Ronska began telling a story, one she would cling to throughout the investigation and trial. She said Marcin had tried to take hurt himself. She claimed she was in shock, frightened, and had simply done her best to help the man she described as the love of her life. But inside that flat, the physical evidence told a very different story. A 20-centimeter-long kitchen knife, freshly washed, was discovered sitting in the sink. Its size and shape were consistent with the fatal wound. Blood was found not only in the bedroom, but around the sink and bathroom taps. Officers noticed blood staining Ronska's socks, and she was seen wiping her hands as police entered the property. None of it aligned with a self-inflicted injury. A Home Office forensic pathologist, Dr. Brian Rogers, later delivered one of the most damaging pieces of testimony. He explained that the wound had been inflicted with extreme force so severe that 3 ribs were fractured, one of them completely severed. He told the court it was highly unusual, and indeed improbable, for a right-handed person to inflict such an injury on themselves. The prosecution said it plainly: this was not ended life. This was a slaying. During the 9-day trial at Mold Crown Court, jurors heard that Wronska had been extremely drunk that evening. Prosecutors argued that a domestic argument escalated when Marchin refused to help her redecorate their home. In that moment, fueled by alcohol and frustration, Wronska picked up the knife and attacked her partner in a sudden, explosive outburst of rage. The court also heard troubling background evidence. A former partner of Wronska came forward, claiming she had attacked him years earlier and had chillingly told him he was lucky she did not stab him in the vital organs. That history, combined with the forensic evidence and the attempt to clean and conceal the weapon, painted a damning picture. Wronska denied everything. She denied being angry. She denied any argument. She denied knowing how the knife ended up in the sink or why Marcin's clothing was torn. But after less than 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury saw through her account. In April 2025, they returned a unanimous verdict of guilty. Sentencing followed on May 19, 2025. In a silent courtroom, Joanna Wronska stood as His Honor Judge Reese Rowlands addressed her directly. He described the slaying as a momentary, explosive loss of temper and told her the attack was both cruel and unnecessary. He reminded her that one violent decision had cost Marcin Koziol his life and destroyed multiple families forever. Wronska was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 15 years and 4 months before she can even be considered for release. She showed no visible reaction as the sentence was passed. At number 21 in this countdown, we have Alice Mackey, a 42-year-old woman from Kingsley, Hampshire, whose case left an entire village struggling to understand how a quiet afternoon ended in unimaginable loss. Alice Mackey brutally murdered her 2-year-old daughter, Annabelle Mackey, by drowning in a village pond in Kingsley near Borden, Hampshire. The incident happened on Sunday, the 10th of September 2023, barely 300 meters from the family home. What followed was a carefully constructed lie, a devastating investigation, and ultimately a courtroom reckoning that would expose the depth of her mental collapse. On that day, Mackey took Annabelle from their home and walked with her to Kingsley Pond. There, she held her daughter in the water until she stopped struggling. Annabelle was later found unresponsive and rushed to hospital in a critical condition. Despite doctors' efforts, she died the following afternoon, on Monday, the 11th of September, when life support was withdrawn. After returning home, Mackey dialed emergency services, claiming she had put Annabelle to bed, returned an hour later, and found her missing. She told the operator she believed someone had entered the house and taken her child, and that she later discovered Annabelle in the pond. Hampshire Constabulary launched a thorough investigation, and it did not take long for Mackey's account to unravel. Evidence confirmed her story was false, and that she alone was responsible for Annabelle's drowning. She was initially charged with murder. However, psychiatric assessments carried out by 3 psychiatrists, including one instructed by the Crown Prosecution Service, revealed that Mackey had been suffering from severe mental illness at the time, including postpartum psychosis and anxiety. The assessments concluded that her ability to make rational judgments and exercise self-control had been substantially impaired. In July 2025, Alice Mackey pleaded guilty to manslaughter by reason of diminished responsibility. The court heard that she held a delusional belief that she was a bad mother, and that slaying her daughter was, in her mind, an act of mercy meant to protect Annabelle from harm. Mr. Justice Saini described the case as tragic, telling the court that Mackey had been mentally unwell from the time Annabelle was born until her death. He said she believed, in her delusional state, that murdering her daughter was a way of keeping her safe. The sentencing hearing was filled with raw emotion. Annabelle's father, Peter Mackey, told the court he was deeply traumatized by the thought of how his daughter was murdered. He said he was tormented by imagining how frightened she must have been, the pain she endured, and the distress she suffered. He spoke of the guilt he carries for not being home that day to protect her. He described Annabelle as his little friend, saying she was caring, happy, and positive, and spoke of the milestones she would never reach, a future that had been stolen. On Monday, the 6th of October, 2025, at Winchester Crown Court, Alice Mackey was sentenced to 4 years imprisonment. The judge acknowledged her remorse and mental illness, but made clear that it was not an excuse. At number 22 in this countdown of the most evil UK women sentenced for murder in 2025, we have Claire Button. A 36-year-old woman from South Ockendon, Essex, was convicted of murdering her 5-year-old autistic son, Lincoln Button, following an 8-day trial at Basildon Crown Court. The case sent shockwaves through the community, revealing a tragedy that no parent could imagine. On Thursday, the 16th of October, 2025, a unanimous jury found her guilty after more than 8 hours of deliberation. The case began on Sunday, the 15th of December, 2024, when Lincoln was tragically murdered at their family home on Windstar Drive. Emergency services were called to the Button residence after concerns were raised for the welfare of both mother and child. Paramedics arrived quickly, but despite their best efforts, Lincoln had already passed away. Claire was taken to hospital for treatment and later arrested, before appearing at Basildon Crown Court on Wednesday, the 9th of April, 2025. The investigation, led by Detective Chief Inspector Alan Blakesley, revealed a complex and heart-wrenching chain of events that left the community stunned. During the trial, the prosecution argued that Claire's actions were deliberate and unlawful, presenting evidence that Lincoln's death was intentional. The defense highlighted her severe mental health struggles, including a diagnosis of mixed anxiety and depressive disorder, and explained how she believed a commanding voice urged her to end both her life and her son's. Judge Samantha Lee described the trial as one of the hardest I've heard in almost 30 years, emphasizing the emotional weight of the case. Family members provided powerful testimony, giving a glimpse into the immense strain within the household. Claire's husband, Nicky Button, spoke about the challenges of caring for Lincoln and the emotional toll it had taken on his wife, while expressing his continuing love for her despite the tragedy. Lincoln's relatives described him as a cherished, gentle, and loving child whose memory will remain in their hearts forever. Their words painted a picture of the immense grief and heartbreak left behind. On Friday, the 17th of October, 2025, Claire Button was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 9 years before she could be considered for release. The judge acknowledged her mental health struggles, but stressed that the deliberate act that ended Lincoln's life required accountability. Claire's family expressed gratitude to the Essex Police, especially Detective Constable Keith Corey, for their compassion and steady support throughout the investigation, helping them navigate one of the most painful chapters of their lives. At number 16 in this countdown we have Tuche Koskun, a 21-year-old woman from Enfield, North London, whose violent actions ended a man's life inside his own home. What began as a dispute over stolen illegal substances spiraled into a brutal murder that shocked Welwyn Garden City. In the early hours of Sunday, the 19th of May, 2024, police were called to a disturbance at a property in Linkfield, Welwyn Garden City. When officers and paramedics arrived, they found 42-year-old Gavin Hubbard, a father of 3, suffering from catastrophic injuries. Despite the efforts of ambulance crews and an air ambulance team, Gavin was pronounced dead at the scene. He had been attacked 22 times. The attack included 9 deep stab wounds and 13 slicing injuries, one of which proved fatal. The court heard that earlier that evening, Hubbard, who struggled with addiction, had allegedly stolen illegal substances from Costco. Enraged, she armed herself with a large kitchen knife and went directly to his address to confront him. What followed was not a scuffle or a single impulsive act, but a sustained and ferocious assault. Prosecutors argued that the sheer number and severity of the wounds showed a clear intent to cause serious harm, if not death itself. Costco was arrested and charged with murder. During the police investigation, officers searched her address and seized a quantity of Class A illegal substances, including and heroin, along with cash, a mobile phone, and illegal substance paraphernalia. She later pleaded guilty to 2 counts of possession with intent to supply Class A illegal substances. However, when it came to Gavin Hubbard's slaying, Costco denied responsibility and claimed she had acted in self-defense. Her trial took place at St. Albans Crown Court, where the jury heard detailed forensic evidence about the nature of the wounds and the circumstances of the attack. Prosecutors told the court that only someone intent on causing death would strike so many times with such force. In November 2024, after considering all the evidence, the jury returned a unanimous verdict of guilty, rejecting Costco's claim of self-defense. On Thursday, the 16th of January, 2025, Costco stood before the court for sentencing. Judge Jonathan Mann described the slaying as savage and deliberate. He imposed a mandatory life sentence, ordering that Costco must serve a minimum of 21 years in prison before she can even be considered for release. He told her that the number of stab wounds spoke volumes about her intentions that night. In addition to the murder sentence, she was handed 45 months imprisonment for each of the 2 illegal substance supply offenses to be served concurrently. Thank you for watching. Check out these other interesting clips from the channel, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.